to a mere 50,000. But a besieging army would still be at a tremendous disadvantage. Constantinople was surrounded on 3 sides by water and massively fortified. It was encircled by a triple ring of walls nearly 100 feet high and 30 feet thick. And they had already stood for 1,000 years. But Mehmed had an answer for these walls.
And part of the military superiority of the Ottomans came from their sophisticated and diverse use of the possibilities of gunpowder. The siege of Constantinople in 1453 under Mehmed the Conqueror saw the first dramatic application of this in the form of huge cannons that had not been seen before, which Mehmed had specially commissioned for the occasion.
Earlier cannons had been assembled with strips of forged metal bound with hoops. They fired stone projectiles with little more power than a catapult. A new breed of cannons could be cast of solid bronze and packed with enough gunpowder to propel metal cannonballs with staggering force. But Mehmed was not staking his hopes on cannon alone. The mile-wide channel of the Bosphorus Strait was all that connected the city to the Black Sea. If he could cut it off, Constantinople would be at his mercy. Mehmed needed to construct a strategically positioned fortress to close the strait. He built it right in the shadow of the great city walls. It took less than 4 months to build a massive 7-towered citadel called Rumeli Hisar. Mehmed himself is said to have carried stones during its construction. No sooner was it completed than he tightened his noose around the neck of the Bosphorus. The first ship to defy his orders to stop was sunk, its crew decapitated and its captain impaled on the castle walls. To stop Mehmed's ships from approaching, the Byzantines strung a massive chain across the strait. On April 22nd, 1453, the besieged city watched in horror as Mehmed's troops hoisted 70 of his ships ashore, sliding them over land on greased planks past the barrier chain. More than 100,000 Ottoman soldiers now stood before the walls of Constantinople, braced for the greatest bombardment the history of warfare had ever known. Under relentless fire, the city's 7,000 Christian defenders held out for nearly a month. In desperation, the Byzantines who occupied the city appealed to their fellow Christians across the continent for help.
But of course, Europe in the 15th century was completely incapable of mounting any kind of a concerted opposition to the rising Turkish threat in the east.
At that time, the kings of Europe had military and political problems of their own. Constantinople would have to fend for itself. Shortly before dawn on May 29, 1453, the Turkish army breached the walls of the city. Within hours, Constantinople was in the hands of the Ottomans. Mehmed rode into the city and went straight to its most celebrated prize, the magnificent church of Hagia Sophia. Built by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, its name meant the Church of Holy Wisdom. It was the largest enclosed space in the world.
Surely other groups of Muslims and the Ottomans themselves had come across many, many churches. They had seen churches before. But they had never seen anything, nobody had ever seen anything like Hagia Sophia.
The Hagia Sophia, or Hagia Sophia as it's called in Turkish, was one of the marvels of architecture, marvels of the world. It had the largest and highest dome in history, and it was beautifully embellished with gold, mosaics, and the space is incredible. For Mehmet, it was a great booty.
Inside the church, a Turkish voice rose, proclaiming in Arabic the first pillar of Islam. There is no God but God. Muhammad is his messenger. The single greatest church in Christendom was now a mosque. The Hagia Sophia became the inspiration for all Ottoman domed mosques to come. But none would ever match its size and scope, and it belonged to Mehmet the Conqueror. News of his triumph sent shockwaves around the world.
For Europeans, it was a concomitant disaster. Constantinople was, after all, the new Rome. It was Constantine's capital city. It was the symbol of Christian dominance in the East.
The Ottoman rulers had long stacked up titles for themselves. Khan, which is Turkish for emperor. Shahi Shah, Persian for king of kings. And Sultan, the Arabic word for ruler. But now, with all the former Byzantine Empire under their command, Mehmet and his successors claimed yet another title, Holy Roman Emperor. The Ottomans had reached the gates of the West and were poised to push on towards what they now claimed as their ultimate destiny, the conquest of Europe. That quest would fall to the most legendary sultan of all. He was born at the beginning of the 10th century by the Muslim calendar, and he was the 10th sultan descended from Osman. He was a child of destiny, whose greatness was expected.
In the parlance of the day, he was the Sahib Quran, the universal ruler, the master of an auspicious conjunction, whose coming has been foretold, whose identity is confirmed astrologically.
His name was Suleiman, after Solomon, the wise king of the Old Testament. The Ottoman Empire would reach its apex under Suleiman's reign.
Suleiman was extremely well educated. He was trained to the Sultanate from the day he was born.
As a young prince, he formed a relationship that would have a tremendous impact on his life and on the empire as well.
And when he was still a crown prince, he also developed a great friendship with a convert, a Greek convert who took the name Ibrahim.
The two were very close in age and apparently very close in other ways, personally, intellectually, educated together to a certain extent. And as was common practice, when Suleiman acceded to the throne on the death of his father, he took his faithful Ibrahim with him to Istanbul.
Suleiman was 26 when he took the throne, determined to make his mark on the world as soon as his ministers would let him.
In his early years, Suleiman had to contend, for example, with grand viziers and generals who simply refused to obey him. Feeling, apparently, that here was a 26-year-old kid who had never seen very much in the way of action and hadn't done very much to show that people ought to, in fact, obey him.
The way to prove his mettle was on the battlefield. Every new sultan was expected to begin his reign by expanding the empire. Ottomans now controlled Kurdistan, Egypt, and the holiest cities of Islam, Mecca and Medina. Suleiman set his sights on Belgrade in Hungary, the stepping stone to Europe.
He was the head of the Ottoman dynasty, and he had certain duties to perform. One was conquest, and the first task Suleiman took upon himself a year after he ascended the Ottoman throne was to head towards Belgrade and capture it. Belgrade was very important strategically because it was from there the army could move further on west.
A year later, he turned his ambitions on the island of Rhodes. The tiny island was a troublesome outpost of Christianity in an otherwise Ottoman sea. It was also a haven for pirates, preying on Muslim trade ships. The 50,000 defenders of Rhodes manned one of the strongest forts in the world. Suleiman decided on a tactic other than relying on gunfire from his huge cannons. A new tactic, seldom used until that time.
The Ottomans are the first major force to actually develop new ways of harnessing gunpowder to the cause of military expansion in creative ways.
Ottoman sappers dug out a series of 50 tunnels near the base of the fort so they could mine its foundations. Performing this dangerous work were expendable Christian conscripts from the Balkans. The resulting explosion signaled a furious 6-hour Ottoman assault. But the